So we spent the last couple lessons talking about the law of sines and the law of cosines. We've used them to solve for different angles and solve for different sides when we didn't have right triangles. But the question is, how do I know when to use which law? So that's what we want to look at today, the law of sines versus the law of cosines. So let's take a look at what we know, okay? We already know what the law of sines and law of cosines are. We talked about the law of sines being these ratios, and we talked about the law of cosines being something that looks like this. Although we tend to just remember this first one because it makes me, the first part of it reminds me of the Pythagorean theorem, so it helps me remember it a little better. So that's what we want to be focusing on using. How do I know when to use which one? So let's look at that. Let's start with the law of sines. We actually talked about this when we first introduced the law of sines. We talked about when to use it. A couple things I need to know. To use the law of sines, I need to know two angles and two sides. Now, one of those four things are going to be my unknown. Like when I look at this first, when I look at this first triangle here, I know, here's what I know. I know two sides, they're given to me, and I know one angle given to me. Okay, and I want to find one angle. So there I see if I need two angles, I have two angles. If I need two sides, I have two sides. So two sides, two angles, that's a law of cosines. Or I'm sorry, the law of sines. In the other problem, I know two angles and one side. I am looking for, or what I want to find, is one side. So there again, two angles, check, two angles. Two sides, check, two sides. So there's my law of sines. So two angles, two sides, law of sines. With the law of cosines, oops, wrong pointer. The law of cosines, we need to know something just a little bit different. What I need to use the law of cosines for is if I know three sides and one angle. So again, it's still four things. One of those four is going to be my unknown. In this first problem, I know three sides. I need to find one angle. This is the most obvious case for the law of cosines. Three sides, check. One angle, check. Law of cosines. Okay, in the next problem, I know two sides and one angle. Now, this is starting to look like law of sines, except what I need to find is one side. So when I start adding all that up, three sides, there's my three sides. One angle, one angle. So three sides, one angle, law of cosines. So let's look at some problems real quickly and see if we can figure out which function to use when. Okay, so here we are. Looking at the picture, what do you know? What are you trying to solve for? Which function is it? Okay, so what do we know in this problem? Well, I know if I look at it, I have two sides and an angle. So far I know two sides, one angle. So two sides, one angle. What I'm looking for is one angle. So what I'm looking for is one angle. So when I look at that together, that's two sides, two angles. That sounds to me like the law of sines. Simple as that. When we look at the next problem, I have two sides, one angle. So that's what I know so far. I know two sides, one angle. What I'm looking for is one side. So what I'm looking for is one side. So here again, I start my counting. That's three sides, one angle. Three sides and one angle is the law of cosines. Okay. So it's basically just a counting game to figure out what you're going to be using. Let's look at another one. So here I know 1, 2, 3 sides. Oh, this one's starting to look obvious already. So I know 3 sides. I'm looking for 1 angle. So which law are you going to use here? Good. Did you say law of cosines? You did all right. On the next one, I know 2 angles and 1 side. 2 angles and 1 side. I'm looking for 1 side. So which law are you going to use? Good, law of sines. And again, that's because I know 2 angles, 2 sides. There's that 2 and 2. All right, why don't you figure out the next 2 on your own? Okay, so I'll pull them up here. I'll call this one number 1 and that one number 2. Tell me, which law are you going to use for number 1? Which law are you going to use for number 2? So on the first one, the things I know 2 angles and 1 side. I'm looking for 1 side, so that's 2 sides, 2 angles. That's the law of sines. The next one, I know 2 angles, 2 sides and 1 angle. I'm looking for 1 side, so it's 3 sides and an angle. Law of cosines. Fantastic. This is all we're trying to figure out. This whole unit is based on, hey, what are we using? That's all I'm doing in this section, okay? We may not even actually solve any of these problems. So let's look at the next one. Let's look at an actual problem now. So I'm solving for side AC. So I'm going to put my X on side AC. Which trig function do you think we're going to use? Okay, so as I start my counting, I've got 2 angles, 2 sides. So 2 angles, 2 sides makes me immediately begin. Let's see, 2 angles, 2 sides. That makes me think law of sines. Now, just for the sake of setting up this problem, I'm looking for X, which is across from 22. So that's the sine of 22 over X. And in the 24, I need to get this missing angle. Okay, so we go to our calculator, and I'm going to do 118 plus 22, subtract that from 180. I'm going to get a 40-degree angle here. So that's going to give me sine of 40 over 24. And we would solve that. I'm not even asking you to solve that for right now, okay? Let's move on to our next problem. So look at this one. I'm solving for BC. Which law are you going to use? So I start my counting. I see I have actually 1, 2, 3 sides and 1 angle. So that looks like the law of cosines. And like I said, just for fun, let's set that up. The side I'm looking for is across from the angle, so there's my lone side. X squared equals 30 squared plus 21 squared minus 2 times 30 times 21 cosine of 123. Where'd I get a 5 from? 123. But again, I'm not worried about you solving this, okay? So let's look at another problem, okay? All we're trying to do is figure out which law we're using when. We already know how to do the laws. So that's what I want you to do for these 4 problems. If you're going to solve for X, just tell me which law would you use. Okay, so our first one, 2 angles, 2 sides. That's going to be the law of sines. I'm going to get there we go. I'm going to do the law of sines. This one, 2 sides, 2 angles. There again, law of sines, 2 and 2. 3 sides, 1 angle, 3 and 1, law of cosines. 3 sides, 1 angle, 3 and 1, law of cosines. Excellent. Like I said, that's all I'm worried about doing right now is making sure you know when to use them. You should already be able to use them. So number 10, same type of problem. And this time on your paper, you don't have to type this out. Tell me which law you're going to use, and then you might want to try to write it out. So which law are you going to use to solve this? Okay, so I got 3 sides and 1 angle. So 3 sides and 1 angle. Whoops. That makes me think law of cosines. This one would be set up. Let's see, I'm looking for, there's my lone side. So 62 squared equals f squared plus 71 squared minus 2 times 71 times f times the cosine of 36. And I'll be honest with you, you don't quite know enough algebra to be able to solve this very easily. So this is not something I would ask you to solve, okay? In fact, we're not even going to try that, okay? It's well above this class. Let's try another problem. Let's take a look at one more, and then I'll let you try some on your own. Which law are you going to use for this problem? Okay, I see again, 3 sides and an angle. So 3 sides and an angle makes me think law of sines again. Or I'm sorry, law of cosines again. I was reading something there. So the lone side is 25. So 25 squared equals 12 squared plus x squared minus 12 times 25 times x times the cosine of 148. And again, this one's beyond our ability to solve in this course. Okay, so there you go. That's what we're going to be working on. So now you have a Google form, and really the Google form is just asking you, which law are you going to use? Okay, so that's what you got. And we'll take a look at one more piece of special advanced trig in our next lesson. Okay, bye-bye.